Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's exchange talk. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, or whatever it happens to be, wherever you are. My name is Stuart Harris-Logan, and I'm the Keeper of Archives and Collections at RCS. And it's my joy to chair this evening's event and to introduce our speaker, who will be Minnie Crook. Minnie graduated from our CPP course in 2020. And after that, she became the first artist in residence for the RCS Archives and Collections. It began as an idea from Rachel O'Neill, who's one of the lecturers on the CPP course. And it was enabled by Laura Bissell, the head of department, and it was a great success. So we're hoping, in the fullness of time, to repeat it again this year. But you're not here to see me, so I shan't take up too much time. It's just to remind you all that you can ask questions in the Q&A function, and if you accidentally end up firing them into the chat function, I'm sure I'll pick them up there too. Minnie will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll come back for those questions at the end. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Minnie Crook.
Hello, everybody. It's very odd. Welcome. I'm very glad to be here this evening. So I'll just get on and start sharing my screen. So yeah. I am Minnie Crook, a performance artist, facilitator, and researcher, working across both visual art and theatre disciplines. Originally from Leamington Spa, my work explores ideas of memory and nostalgia, investigating my own autobiography and the conceptual distances between myself and my family members. Within my performance work, I often use visual projection, a cappella song, and familial archives in the forms of photos, letters, home video footage, voice recordings, songs, and stories. And I often work in collaboration with my family members, past and present, in an attempt to respond to themes of time and grief in my current personal landscape. Graduating in 2020 with a first-class BA Honours from the Contemporary Performance Practice Programme at the RCS, I have since undertaken multiple artist residencies and directing commissions, some residencies of which include After Illusion in 2020 and Tramshed's Generator Festival in 2021. I've also been recipient of the Make It Happen Fund in 2021 as well. I've always been obsessed with tracing my personal history, my lineage, and my genealogical line. From studying my family tree with my grandma, or listening to stories that my granddad told me about distant relatives emigrating to America from Ireland years and years ago. I find it fascinating that I am now the new generation of my family, feeling a huge sense of responsibility to keep that knowledge of where I have come from present and keep the stories that I have been told alive. My practice questions how we process remembering and the nostalgia we often let ourselves be absorbed by. I certainly lose myself in the throes of reminiscing of times now past. Yet I am fully aware of the reality of those moments and the idealistic view that I have placed upon them. But there's something captivating and simply joyous about spending hours and hours going through my family photographs or watching old home video footage. I suppose it's my curiosity of being able to see things of a time before I could remember or even existed. That I am, for example, able to watch my parents when they were my age or see them get married as if I was there. This Fascination has always been with me, and I'm lucky enough that my arts practice has become a process of continuing to discover this attachment. Theorist Annette Kuhn refers to this as memory work, stating that memory work is a method and practice of unearthing and making public untold stories, that it can create new understandings of both past and present. Similarly to this is my own understanding of that overwhelming need to work in this way, to trace these associations to the past, present, and future, and explore the relationships between people and place, realizing the links that seem to interconnect us all together. Like Marcus Bolkenhol states in his paper, The Art of Tracing, that following a trace takes the follower through a particular geography, much like moving along a roadmap. At the time, following a trace is a movement in time. Someone or something left a trace in the past, and following it means getting in touch with that past. Today, I'm here to talk about my residency in the Archives and Collections Department here at RCS that took place last summer, which seems like a very long time ago now. But it marked the start of a new developmental phase of work and my first in-person project since COVID-19. I have named this new phase of work Retracing the Forgotten, which for me is an umbrella term that essentially means that I'm undertaking a process of unearthing artifacts, materials, concepts, and ideas that have otherwise been forgotten and discovering their relation to our current lives. This new phase of work began to establish itself when my parents moved house in early 2021. It was a cathartic process of sorting through the family home, the piles and piles of stuff that we had acquired over 50 years or so, things that we had collected, that we had formed attachments to, and the things that we'd even forgotten we had. Moving house was perhaps an excuse to begin the retracing, the sifting through the many memory boxes that I kept full of trinkets and special items that I simply had to keep. From this, I began to view my own stuff as a collection of my own personal memorabilia. And I was interested in utilizing this concept within a wider archival arts practice. In Sophia Carvalho's paper, Reconstructing Life Narratives Through Personal Archives, she quotes Theodore Schillenberg and his ideas of archival theory, stating that while archives grow out of some regular functional activity, historical manuscripts, that is, personal archives, in contrast, are usually the product of a spontaneous expression of thought and feeling. They are thus ordinarily created in a haphazard and not in a systematic manner. An archive itself is a historical practice of preserving the mark-making processes of the past. Quoted from the International Council on Archives website, archives are witnesses to the past. They provide evidence and explanation and justification, both for past actions and current decisions. Archives are unique, contemporaneous records, and so once lost, cannot be replaced. It is only through proper identification, care, and wide access that the vital role that archives have can be fully realized to the benefit of humanity. For me, archives have the ability to speak about a time that no longer exists. They are magical things that are hidden within magical spaces, treasure troves of the unexplored, just waiting to be unearthed, to be reused and reloved. This residency call out was therefore a perfect opportunity to develop this idea of retracing, placing my arts practice and personal archives, my home video footage in VHS format, recordings of family members, photographs and letters, placing them within a site specifically designed to preserve things from the past. I was so interested in this residency forming a comparative duality between the archives at RCS and my own materials, and was keen to discover the progression of new performance within this space, freely exploring the boxes of items, the pages and pages of music scores, discovering the things that haven't been seen in years or haven't been touched since they were originally donated. Matthew Reason, in his article Archive or Memory, the Detritus of Live Performance, states that the archive provides an opportunity to claim a vidality beyond the anecdotal or speculative, as an aid to and justification of the researcher's own memory and interpretation. This is the attraction of the archive for the performing arts researcher. Whereas each performance disappears, the archive offers the possibility of supplementing and perhaps supplanting doubtful memory as the site of performance record. The prospect, therefore, of this site being a catalyst for a new performance phase that develops my work was thrilling. And the reality of this being my first in-person residency, I wanted to make the most of it and to absorb absolutely everything. Even on the first day, I remember Stuart showing me around, and I felt so overwhelmed at the concept of the archive itself and the singular purpose of the preservation that it holds. I almost didn't know where to start. And so I began to film an initial response idea, which I'm going to share with you now. This short video formed the first moment of seeing my marks within the space. Using this projection as an installation to visually layer the archives perhaps speaks of the scale and the amount of them, but also references the complexities of the archives becoming artworks themselves. I was playing with this idea of archive upon archive to kind of explain the shelves and the scale of how many things are within this space. Before starting the residency, I had proposed a few areas of interest, avenues that I thought I could focus on to make the most of my time there. As I've briefly mentioned before, my practice has always been in constant collaboration and response to my family members, particularly my granddad, as we share a passion for singing and storytelling. We would often sit in the car listening to all his folk CDs, or the Dubliners or Eva Cassidy, and sing along to full albums just because we knew all the words. I sadly lost my granddad in July 2020, and this residency marked a year of my granddad's passing. And so it felt significant that I utilised my collected memorabilia alongside the extensive amount of documentation I had of him, recordings of him singing, speaking to me on the phone, and footage of him. I proposed to view the archives at RCS as a means to trace the life and ultimately the memory of my granddad. I was interested in situating my personal material within the space, adding to the many layers of existing things already there, and wanted to explore how my granddad might become present without him being here physically. This residency, therefore, initially focused on the year 1937, the year my granddad was born, but was loose in its trajectory and its outcome. I knew I wanted an organic process to allow the connections between the personal and the wider archive to appear naturally. I wanted to spend time sitting within the rolling shelves, working out the space, even how the mechanism worked, as the room itself was an amazing site to be based in. With this in mind, I discovered all the student records with the same surname as my granddad's and their enrollment cards from 1937. I discovered folders of admin paperwork also from the same year. So this is an enrollment card for somebody with the same surname, Henderson, which you can see, Harry Henderson, who enrolled in 1937. Folders of admin paperwork also from the same year, which included costume orders from shows and student absent notes. What struck me was the fragility of some of these documents and how the typewriter had left ink marks on the paper from 1937. And it's this idea of these unknown people who have sat at desks 85 years ago and typed out these documents, and me being able to pick them up and look through them and feel what they feel like is just amazing. I was reminded of my granddad's love of folk music when, coincidentally, on the same week as my residency started, a new donation had been made to the archive. And I can't help but feel like it was some form of fate or a way of my granddad speaking to me directly, but it was an entire collection of folk music. Many recordings and notebooks of handwritten lyrics of basically all the folk songs ever written. I came across this one song, Hares on the Mountain. And at the top of the page, it states, sung by Mrs. Hooper and Mrs. White at Horbridge, September 1903. These lyrics, of which are slightly different to the contemporary version of the song that I was familiar with, that I think Laura Marling sings, but I instantly wanted to hear these songs together. There was an opportunity here to layer 117 years worth of song. And so I learned the 1903 version by comparing my basic sheet music reading skills to multiple old YouTube videos that I found. And I'll just play this exploration now.
If all the young men were hares on the mountain, if all the young men were hares on the mountain, how many young girls would take guns and go hunting? Young women, if all run young men like hares on the mountain, young women, they'll run like hares on the mountain. If I was but a young man, I'd soon go a-hunting to me right fall-a-diddle-day, me right fall-a-diddle-day. Young women, they'll sing like birds in the bushes, young women, they'll sing like birds in the bushes. And if I was a young man, I'd go bang those bushes. How many young girls would go beating the bushes?
This layering, plus the footage of the archives, suggests an aliveness within the aisles, making them be seen again, if only for a brief time. Revealing the marks that had been made in the past or that were kept hidden, and seeing them again is in some ways continuing their memory into the future. From this and the many fragments of ideas, of items, of things that I'd come across so far, seemed to amalgamate into a series of performative installation responses. I began adding aspects from my personal archive into the space and experimenting with this duality and concept of layering. Just put another quick film to show you. That's just a quick bit of footage there. But this moment, this footage is of me and my granddad singing together in the Irish club in Leamington. It's projected onto the archive rolling shelves, and this ultimately brought that sharper focus and life-size presence, the immateriality of my granddad now. In some ways, I was anxious about how to be sensitive with my feelings of grief, whether I was able to make performance with my granddad again in this way after his passing. But I think this site made the content of my work feel entirely natural, that he was in fact supposed to be preserved in the archive, and that he was also with me being preserved in there. Hywell Griffiths stated in his paper, Enacting Memory and Grief in Poetic Landscapes, that memories and grief can also, however, be spatially temporarily dispersed and fragmentary, creating landscapes in which things are simultaneously present and absent. In the same way, by physically placing him in the archive, it was a symbolic way for me to conserve his life and memory, housed within and protected by the archives themselves. This exploration continued as I began experimenting with the sound recordings that I had of him, questioning the realization of my granddad's presence there. I'm gonna quickly show another film.
You fill up my senses like a night in a forest, like the mountains in springtime, like a walk in the rain, like a storm in the desert, like a sleepy blue ocean. You fill up my senses, come fill me again. Come, let me love you, let me give my life to you. Let me drown in your laughter, let me die in your arms, let me lay down beside you, let me always be with you. Come, let me love you, come love me again. Hello there, how are you, stranger? Not too bad at all. I've got a couple of visitors here that like me. And very stressed, you know, they just come in and say, hey, are you going to bed? Because I'm still in my pajamas. Yeah. We got your letter yesterday. Thank you very much. It was lovely. What are you doing with yourself? Well, you're part-timer, I think. Yeah, you're gonna have a loose end, are you? Good as well, that's what it's for. Keep enjoying yourself. She's not too good.
Sorry, 1 second, just find where I am. Yes, so that was a video exploration of me singing with my granddad within the space. And then some sound recording that I had of a phone call conversation that we had, must be nearly 3 years now, with which I removed myself, made myself absent in the phone call conversation and just used his voice in that. On reflection, when I watch that, I find it, irrespective of it being performative or not, it's hugely emotional. The process of feeling ready to hear his voice again and to sing with me like we used to do for the first time since losing him felt very right in this moment there, even if it might not be right to watch it back now. It feels maybe slightly more uncomfortable now, but in that space, it felt completely right to work with those things. So right, in fact, that I had him singing that song on repeat, and I sang with him over and over and over again, and it felt like some sort of cathartic ritual and form of grief that I was feeling at that moment. Yeah, I'm just going to move on slightly and then come back to ideas that I've touched on here. I was reminded of my granddad's own vast collection of cassette tapes when I came across a box of them hidden within the shelves. This now dated form of listening to music is so inaccessible to our contemporary digital ways of living. And to access this sound, I had to be lucky enough for there to be a working tape player nearby. Luckily there was, and so I spent hours listening to them and became obsessed with this one particular tape named Dad's Uncle David, which you can see here. It was a simple recording within the collection of a family gathering. I'm assuming the voices were of Dad's Uncle David and other family members, and it was dated 1993, which also happens to be the year that my parents got married. Within the recording, they're talking about their age and health and laughing with each other and telling each other stories of their pasts. And it was a very natural, familiar sound to me that instantly brought me back to my own memories of my family sitting together, usually at birthdays or Christmases, talking about significantly insignificant things that you do with family in those contexts. Another noteworthy find for me was a vast collection of memorabilia once owned by jazz singer Annie Ross. Some objects included the costume jewelry that she wore on stage and her personal family photographs of when she was a little girl. This was all bequeathed to the archive when she passed away by her family members, who I assume didn't know what to do with such a collection of things. And it was a real insight into the preservation of her memory. I remember opening a box and finding a scarf along with a photograph of her wearing that scarf on stage. And the smell of cigarettes wafted from the box. And I thought it was amazing that even the smell of her was preserved within the archive And when you open it, this release of a smell came out. It just felt very overwhelming. Leah Sander states in her thesis, Collecting Our Thoughts and Recollecting Our Stories, that personal archive creation is driven by the urge to collect. And if collections are used for self-expression and are representative of the self's life, they are used to tell stories, in particular, stories of the self. Hence, by collecting, the creator not only surrounds his personal archive with narrative, his self-narrative, but also he constructs his identity and how he will be remembered, searching for an escape to his own oblivion. Likewise, what I found most powerful was the reality of my access to these tangible items. These personal items, like Annie Ross's childhood photographs and Dad's Uncle David's tape, that hadn't been looked at or listened to in years, that they were simply donated to an archive to be preserved and to commemorate lives that have been lived. I also found myself creating my own narrative surrounding these people, interpreting their lives and placing my own perspectives and thoughts of what they were like. I'd often be caught in this weird, almost uncomfortable feeling of prying, of looking into things, looking at intimate things that I probably shouldn't be looking at. And it felt as though I was wrongly looking directly into the past itself. During the residency, I became more interested in exploring these deep connections between people, Annie Ross, Dad's Uncle David, my granddad and myself, the place, the archive itself in Glasgow, and time, 2021 in comparison to 1937 and other significant dates throughout my lifetime. I came across a scrapbook that RCS had made out of the paper cuttings that mentioned all alumni and people that they have worked with. And I found this one from 1995, which is the year I was born. It's a newspaper cutting of about a change of conductor. But what struck me was that it's from the Leamington Spa Courier in 1995, 2 weeks before I was born. And suddenly this link between people, place and time was so viscerally real. It was almost bizarre to be working up in Glasgow, miles away from home, yet feeling so interconnected with Leamington, and just picturing what was happening at that time of the 24th of November in 1995, which I think perhaps was my due date, but my mum about to have me a couple of weeks later. And then this happening and RCS making a record of it, I just found was completely overwhelming. And that those connections that we have of things happening all at the same time is just what I absolutely love. Carvalho states that as a result, it is up to the researcher to identify, interpret and display the personal archive's meta-narrative, life narrative, during a process in which the researcher reconstructs the construction made by the creator narrator. In the same way, it was up to me to construct a narrative of performance that highlighted these significant findings, or simply the significant feelings of the residency as a whole. This final video that I am going to share with you is the performance outcome of my residency week, an assemblage of the personal and the collective, of the ideas discovered during my week.
I will smile when I think of you. I'll dream where you dream. You know I live in the same city you live in. Given all that you've been through and all that you've seen, when times are lean and you mean to make a living, songs are widowed when they've lost the ones they're for. Questions hang around like doors. Lives are riddled with these small and petty gods that worry us to crowd around the door. And I will smile when I think of you. And I will smile when I think of you. My name is John Henderson, and I'm Minnie's granddad. I'm just giving a little history of my time from when I was born in Dublin. I was born in Dublin City on the 19th of July, 1937, and lived in the city or surrounding areas for 17 years. We moved to various places, some on the north side of Dublin, some near O'Connell Street, and others down in the south near a sea town of Sandymount and Irish Town. From there, I joined the army at 17, and I went too far. I'll just go back over. We had a family of 9 people, mom and dad and 7 children. Only at the moment now, sorry. I joined the British Army at 18 and have come to 18. And I came to England when I was demoted from the army. And I arrived in Leamington. My dad had already been here, and my brother Paddy worked here, where I met Nanny, and we got married in Middleton, County Cork. So we got married in Middleton, County Cork in Ireland on July the 25th, 1959. We had 2 girls, Jerry and Susan, and 7 grandchildren. My life in Ireland was a bit tough because of the war, but at the same time we had a good time going out on our bikes along the coast and swimming. and up in the mountains to play and pick blackberries. So it was not too bad. We made the best of things.
Sorry, just muted then, wasn't I? Sorry. Yes. When reflecting on the performance that I made, I understand it as a form of my own mark making and a process of leaving a trace within the site itself. To have a projection in the space, creating that nostalgic aesthetic alongside the tangible fragments of documents from 1937. The repetition of recorded footage and live body in the space encapsulates only a fraction of the whole experience. It was only whilst preparing for today that I became aware of my own documentation of the residency, like the PowerPoint and videos I'm showing this evening. The evidence of my creative findings are simply a copy of the live. The copies of the genuine, tangible documents and original artifacts are now in 2D form. They are duplicates, in a sense. My work outcome is digital. The footage and photographs exist on my hard drive and on my laptop, a method that, like the cassette tape player, will eventually run out of fashion and be lost. And I was subconsciously only archiving the archive itself. However, the archive is unchanged. The original materials are still there, and the truth and the reality of my performances therefore remain rooted and exist live in the site itself only. Comparatively, Matthew Reason states, put very simply, if you value live performance because of its liveness, then memory must be a more appropriate site for any trace or afterlife than the frozen and unchanged archive. By making performance within this site-specific space, I have now gained a deeper understanding of my practice being archival and the organic creation of performance making in a responsive way. Ultimately, my curiosity in artifacts and things from the past has not only enhanced my work, but has created a need in me to keep developing these memory-based ideas. Overall, this residency was a cathartic experience and has allowed me to reconnect with my personal arts practice, my granddad, and also to comparatively link this work with the wider public collections of RCS and beyond. The possibilities of other directions that this work could have gone in was endless, just like the archive itself, which is also an endless conceptual entity, showing years and years of preservation of the past, but also an indefinite ongoing future. I wonder what it would be like, perhaps, to do this residency again in 10 years' time, to work with the new personal and public archives and witness the changes in the collections. Just a thought. All my performance work and documented things that I have discovered throughout the residency will be donated as part of the collection itself and will become an archive in its own right, remaining on the shelves, preserving my thoughts and work until somebody else comes along and rediscovers it, threading together their own ideas, discovered artifacts and relevance to my practice, thus coming full circle and directly referencing the ever-changing archive as a process of time passing. Going forward, I'm also delighted to say that my degree show, And When I Remember That I Have Forgotten, which was cancelled due to COVID-19, has now been programmed at the Shoot Festival as part of the Coventry City of Culture. And the developments of Retracing the Forgotten during this residency will in no doubt aid the restaging of that work. So that is me for this evening. I think I'm going to pass over to Stuart. If you'd like to come back.
Thank you, Minnie. That was fantastic. Before we open up for the Q&A, because a few questions have popped in, I wanted to just make an observation for everybody's benefit and for my own pride, which was that the archive is really neatly arranged in archive boxes and acid-free card boxes. Minnie had the most incredible ability to seek out the messiest bit of the archive and took all the pictures from there. So we have two ranges of shelving, which are holding areas for sorting and for new archives coming in, which are in bankers' boxes and all that sort of stuff. So if anyone's looking at that thinking that's not proper archival practice, rest assured, we do have it done properly. So anyway, I
probably made a mess of it during my time.
Yes.
And then Stuart was like sifting through everything. What's she done?
And also the other observation I thought was the layering technique that you're using is really interesting in terms of the way it's rediscovering the past. And I'm sure the vocal layering was a real challenge to our BSL interpreter.
Yeah.
So that was interesting watching how that unfolded, but it's really, that's as a sort of metaphor for the way that you were dealing with the dualities of, you know, public archive, personal archive, time, grief, that sort of thing. It really spoke very neatly to that. So to the questions, enough out of me. We've got a few here. So the first one is from John Purser, all the way up in Skye. He says, well done, you have been captured by the past, particularly your family. How would you approach an archive with which you had no immediate and obvious connection that did not depend upon the dates and places of your own life?
Yeah, I think I was initially anxious about the proposal in the archives at RCS, because obviously formerly the RCS was a music school, and so kind of the drama came along many years later, and I had to try and think of the out with knowing what the art was within the archive itself. I had to kind of form some form of link that I could establish before going in or proposing any ideas. And I think that the most obvious one there was my attachment to music. And then that's where the idea came about my granddad and wanting that to be a commemorative residency for me. So I think, I can't remember the question, I've veered off.
It was centered around how you would approach a different archive that didn't have those personal connections. So you were using things like the year 1937,
Yeah.
your own year of birth and that sort of thing as a means by which you interrogated RCS archives. How would you approach a different archive where you didn't use those personal factors?
Yeah, I think I would, what I gained mostly out of working within the archive was the site itself, and perhaps the conceptual idea that the site, being this place that holds things and holds the past in it, is just enough for me. I think I was also given a space opposite the archive studio, which was a blank canvas, just an empty room. And I spent quite a while going through everything in the archive and then removing myself from it, and working in the blank space. And I did some film work in there where I took the archives into that space, but it felt completely entirely wrong to remove those archives from the space they were meant to be in. And so I had to be back in making work within it, because it just felt easier. I think I will always put my own experience of family and dates onto everything that I do, because those connections, like the little paper cutting of Leamington, was just like, oh wow, this amazing thing that RCS reference Leamington a couple of weeks before I was born. Like that just feels so exciting and kind of, I don't know whether spiritual is the right word, but as if these other things are happening beyond our control with time and place and things. So yes, I think that they will always be inherently there. That answers the question.
Well, actually, that leads on quite conveniently to the next question, which is from Richard Greer, which starts, "Sorry for your loss. It's clear you had a lovely friendship together. I wondered whether you would look to explore other spaces created to record, remember, and tell stories." So he says, for instance, museums, galleries, memorials, that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. It's been on my list of places to go. I really want to go to Ireland and see the places that my granddad saw, where my nan and granddad got married, where they traveled. I think I have a real gravitational pull to those places as well that have been inhabited by my family members. So I would definitely love to make work that's about setting as a place. And I can't remember what else I was going to say. I think what's really nice about that, though, is that museums also have a similar concept as an archive to preserve or to keep things. However, museums are much more about show, and art galleries, exhibitions, much more about show. And that's what is perhaps different to an archive, especially my experience of being in the RCS one, where it does feel very safe and protected in there, and you're kind of at the top of this building, and you can see all over Glasgow, but you're in this little space. And so, yeah, I would definitely love to see what that work might look like in a place that my granddad's been to in person, or yeah, things like that.
And of course, RCS Archives is both an archive and a museum, actually. We do both, just because we can't make up our mind. So now, next question is from Ben Redman, and he starts, "Beautiful talk, Minnie. Thanks for sharing such personal, poignant memories. With our move to digital communications in recent years, what do you think will be lost and gained by future generations when looking at our current lives?" And he has a supplementary question, which is, "Have you thought about what will be in your own personal digital trail for future generations?" That's a bit of a mean question.
It's a bit hard, that one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely when, obviously I'm working with lots of footage that is originally on VHS tapes, my granddad's collection of cassette tapes, which, obviously I've referenced that it feels like an inaccessible way of viewing those things. Luckily, we have a video player, and so I can access those. But after a while, those videos themselves will tarnish. And so I've gone through a process of making them all digital, and they exist on my hard drive. Now, if I lost that hard drive, I don't know what I'd do. But it's very interesting when you think about all of these memories, or if you can call them memories, these documentations do exist digitally. And yes, in 10 years' time, 50 years' time, will that still exist? And perhaps they will exist if people have these old machines like laptops and something to plug a hard drive into. So yes, it's a weird one, and I think that's why I was interested in donating my own things into the archive itself, because I want to be preserved in that way as well. Like it does, as melancholic as it sounds, I do want a preservation of me in there, and the ideas that I explored to be part of that cycle of preservation, I think.
And actually, that's a question that's vexing a lot of archivists as well at the moment, that whole idea of digital preservation and obsolescence, and it's really quite tricky how we deal with that. And there isn't an answer to it in the field, to be perfectly honest. So I've just ignored it as an archivist. Now, one more question, which is from Laura Bissell. And she says, are there any other archives you would particularly like to work in to develop these kinds of responses and practices? Is there something specific about performance archives that you feel is important to your process of art making?
I think I was really drawn to the archives of Irish history in Ireland, and would love to make work within that space. And I think that a space like that would therefore kind of lead me to kind of go deeper into my ancestry and genealogy. And so I think the work would be really suited for that sort of an archive. Yeah, there must be kind of family archives around, but I definitely think that there's this need for the work to explore this idea of family. I think with some archives it can feel perhaps not so personal, because there's just different things about different people in boxes away, where there is this kind of loose connection where they're needing to be brought back to life or connected with other things, if that makes sense. And so I think that my work, I can't remember the question, Laura, I'm sorry, but it was about this work being in other archive spaces, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this work would kind of lend itself to lots of different forms of archive, but particularly I would be particularly interested in kind of a more historical archive to do with Irish history at the moment anyway, or as an outcome of this one.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Minnie. And from a personal point of view, it was an absolute joy having you in the archive for that week. It really was. And I think we felt that it was such a success that we're definitely going to have to try it again. So, but thank you very much for being our very first artist in residence. It coincided with the 10th anniversary of the archives. And of course, this talk coincides with the 175th anniversary of the Conservatoire. So your point about things happening at the same time simultaneously and being coincidental is really well made. So thank you very much. And also thank you everybody for attending and for your questions, and for listening and watching Minnie's fantastic talk about her residency at RCS Archives and Collections. It just remains for me to point out that the RCS Exchange is on Twitter, which will magically appear by some technological means that's entirely beyond me on your screens, and also the Exchange website. Next week's talk is being given by Ailey Robertson, and it has the enticing title, How Can the Chopping Techniques Used by Traditional String Players Be Notated and Used in Contemporary Classical Composition? I have no idea what any of that means, but if you want to know, then you need to tune in at 6 o'clock next Monday. And after that, that's us all finished for tonight. So thank you very much, Minnie, again, and thank you all.
Thank you. Bye now.